"Mom, apologize to my mother-in-law or get out of this house." Those words came from Andre, my son, that Thursday night, right at the dining table I had helped him buy. I stood up. Slowly, no shaking, no shouting. I looked straight into the eyes of Valerie Carter, my son's mother-in-law, the woman sitting across from me, wearing the smile of someone who believed she already held victory in her hands. I said only 3 words, then I left. 2 weeks later, Andre knocked on my door in desperation, but that comes later. My name is Gloria Henderson. I am 63 years old, and the story I am about to tell will forever change the relationship between me and my only son. I am not sure whether I did the right thing. There are still nights when the house is so quiet I can hear the second hand of the wall clock Franklin left behind. I lie there and wonder, but there is one thing I know for certain. There are moments in a woman's life when she must choose to be loved or to be respected, and I chose. This story began 3 years ago when Franklin, my husband, passed away, a heart attack, 62 years old. No goodbye. That morning, he left his wedding ring on the bedside table, just like every other night. I keep that ring in a navy blue velvet box. Sometimes I still open it and look, as if I need to remind myself who I was before I became. The woman slowly pushed to the margins of her own family's story. Franklin and I built everything together. From North Star Home and Hardware, the hardware store chain in Plano, to the 3-story house in Willow Bend. From small savings to Andre's future. When Franklin passed away, Andre was 35. He lived in Austin, working as a logistics manager for a transportation company. A good son. Responsible. Or at least, that's what I used to think. 6 months after the funeral, Andre called me. "Mom, I've met the woman I love." Her name was Simone, 28 years old. A marketing student, a perfect smile, glossy manicured nails, and with her came Valerie Carter, her mother, a woman who looked like she had stepped straight out of a reality TV show I had never liked. The first time I met them, a strange feeling tightened in my chest. Something was wrong. But mothers don't say things like that. Mothers smile. Mothers hug. Mothers welcome. And that's what I did, until that night. Until my son demanded that I apologize in front of a woman who had never once respected me. Sometimes we place our trust in people who do not deserve it. Have you ever been disappointed by someone you loved? If you have, tell me in the comments. I truly want to read your story. But before I tell you about that terrible night, the night my son told me to get out of his house, you need to understand who I am, who I used to be. Because sometimes to understand a fall, you need to know how high someone once stood. Franklin and I met when I was 26. He worked at his father's hardware store in downtown Plano. I was an elementary school teacher at a nearby public school. My cousin Diane introduced us at a Christmas party. Franklin wore a dark green sweater. He smelled of fresh wood and clean cologne. When he asked me to dance, his hands were rough, but gentle. "I'm not good with words," he told me that night, "but I know how to build things that last." And he kept his promise. We married 8 months later in a small church. My dress was simple, white lace, long sleeves. Franklin cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. He didn't hide it. He held my hands and said, "I'll take care of you for the rest of your life, Gloria." Even when I'm no longer here, and he did, for 37 years. In the early years, we lived in a small apartment, 2 rooms, a narrow kitchen barely big enough for 2 people to move around. A tiny balcony where Franklin grew tomatoes in pots. Every morning I made coffee with cinnamon. He drank it while reading the newspaper, always the business section first, then sports. I graded my students' assignments at the table using the red pencil he sharpened for me every night, those small gestures. Those details you only realize the value of when they are gone. Andre was born when I was 28. Natural birth. 12 hours of labor. Franklin never left my side. He held my hand so tightly that afterward, bruises were visible on his knuckles. When the nurse placed the baby in my arms, Franklin leaned down and wrapped both of us in an embrace. "My family," he whispered. "My complete family." Andre was an easy baby, slept well, ate well. He had his father's eyes and my nose. He grew quickly, as if rushing toward the future. On Saturdays, Franklin took him to the store, sat him on the counter, taught him the name of every tool. "This is a wrench, son. This is a flathead screwdriver." Andre looked at his father with awe, as if the man before him was the wisest man in the world. And to him, Franklin was exactly that. To me, he was too. On Sundays, we went to the park. Franklin bought cotton candy. Andre chased pigeons. I sat on a bench, watching the two of them from a distance, thinking, this is happiness. This is everything a woman could ever hope for. How naive I was. Naive to believe happiness was a permanent state, rather than fleeting moments you must cling to with both hands before they slip away. When Andre was 10, Franklin's father's store closed. Economic crisis, mounting debt. His father passed away 6 months later. I still believe it was from grief. Franklin inherited debt and an empty store. "We'll start over," he told me one night in our small kitchen. "You and me, Gloria, like always." And we did start over. I quit teaching, not because he asked me to, but because it was necessary. Someone had to stay at the store while Franklin ran to find clients, negotiate with suppliers, rebuild what had been lost. We worked 10, 12, 14 hours a day. Andre ate dinner at my mother's house after school. Many nights we came home so late that he was already asleep. I went into his room, pulled up the blanket, kissed his forehead. "Forgive me, sweetheart," I whispered. "All of this is for you." And it was true. But there were evenings when I came home at 10 at night, exhausted, feet aching, when I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the leather briefcase that once held my students' assignments, the life I had left behind. I missed the children. Missed teaching a child who couldn't count. Missed the moment a student finally understood a difficult problem. "Do you regret it?" Franklin asked one night, catching me staring at the old bag. "No," I said, but my heart said otherwise. 5 years later, the store was profitable again. 10 years later, it became one of the most recognized stores in the region. Franklin opened a second location, then a third. We bought the house in Willow Bend when Andre was 18. 3 stories, a backyard, a 2-car garage. I chose every piece of furniture, every curtain, every light fixture. "This is our home," I said on moving day, "the place where we'll grow old together." Franklin wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Together," he repeated. "Always together." Andre studied business administration at a prestigious university in Texas. He came home every 2 months, carrying a suitcase full of dirty clothes. I washed them, ironed them, folded them neatly. "Mom, I know how to do laundry," he laughed. "I know," I said, "but I like doing it. Because that's what mothers do. Find joy in giving, in caring, in serving." And never imagine that one day, that very devotion could be turned into a weapon against them. Franklin passed away on a Tuesday morning. We were having breakfast. He placed his hand on his chest, looked at me with the eyes I had loved my entire life, and said, "Gloria, He never finished the sentence. I called emergency services. I performed CPR with everything I remembered, but it was too late. At the hospital, a young doctor with round glasses told me, "I'm very sorry, ma'am. We did everything we could." Andre arrived that evening from Austin. He held me in the hospital corridor. We both cried like we never had before. "You have me, Mom," he whispered. "I'll take care of you, just like Dad did." I believed him. How could I not? He was my son. The funeral was both beautiful and horrific. The church was packed. Clients, friends, neighbors. Everyone loved Franklin. I sat in the front row, clutching his ring in my hand. I didn't cry during the service, as if every tear had already been spent at the hospital. That night, alone in the empty house, I opened Franklin's closet. His shirt still smelled like him. I sat on the floor, holding each one, and there, in that small space filled with the familiar scent of wood and cologne, I finally cried. 3 months after the funeral, Franklin's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, an older man with a gray mustache, asked me to come to his office. Mrs. Henderson, we need to review your husband's will. He opened a thick file. You are the sole heir. 3 stores. The house in Willow Bend, the lake house purchased 2 years ago. Investments. Savings. He paused. We're talking about approximately $2.5 million in assets. I was stunned. You have full control over everything, he continued. Andre inherits only when you pass away, or when you decide. When I decide, I repeated. Exactly. Franklin had left me more than assets. He had left me choice. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. I told Andre over the phone, "So you don't have to worry about anything anymore," he said. "And when the time comes, it will all be mine, right?" The way he said it made me stop. Not the words, the tone. "When I'm no longer here," I corrected. "Of course, Mom, you know what I mean." We hung up. I sat alone in the living room, staring at Franklin's ring in its navy velvet box. For the first time, I felt a very small chill, a crack, but I ignored it, because that's what mothers often do. If you've stayed with me this far, stay a little longer, because next, I will tell you what truly happened at that fateful dinner, when a mother realizes her love has been turned into a weapon against her. Before moving on to the next part, leave the city you're listening from in the comments. I want to know where we're walking together from. 6 months after that conversation, Andre called me. His voice was excited, like a child who had just gotten the gift he'd waited all year for. "Mom, I have good news." I was standing in the kitchen, my hands still dusted with flour from kneading a batch of dough. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up the phone. "Go on, sweetheart." "I've met someone." My heart skipped a beat. Andre had been single for many years, focused only on work and his career. I had worried that one day he would become the kind of man who knew how to make money, but didn't know how to live. So just hearing the words "I've met someone" felt like a light switching on in my usually quiet house. "Tell me about her. What's her name?" "Simone." "Simone Carter. She's 28, marketing major. I met her at a work conference 3 months ago." I frowned. 3 months? "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to be sure first," Andre replied immediately, as if he'd already prepared the answer. "But Mom, she's my person. I just know it." I exhaled, lighter. "I'm happy for you, Andre. When do I get to meet her?" "Soon." "Very soon. You'll like her." 2 weeks later, Andre came back to Plano and brought Simone with him. I prepared beef stew the day before, Andre's favorite dish. I laid out the lace tablecloth that had belonged to my grandmother, smoothing every crease with care. I placed fresh flowers in the center of the table. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted that girl to feel welcomed into our family. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Andre stepped in first, beaming. His hand was holding that of a slender girl with long, straight hair, sharp features, and flawless makeup. The kind of beauty that immediately makes you think of the word polished. "Mom, this is Simone." Simone extended her hand. She didn't hug me, just a handshake. Polite, but with an invisible distance between her palm and mine. "It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Henderson." Her voice was soft, almost childlike. But her eyes were not childlike at all. In exactly 2 seconds, those eyes scanned me from head to toe, as if inventorying, categorizing, storing information. I kept smiling. "I'm very happy to meet you too, Simone. Welcome." We sat in the living room. I poured coffee, as I always did, out of habit. Simone looked at the coffee cup as if it were something that didn't belong in her world. "I don't drink coffee, thank you." Do you have soda? Of course, I'll get it right away. I went into the kitchen, and at that very moment, I heard them whispering behind me. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard the tone. Simone's tone, tinged with judgment. Light but sharp, like a thin blade. I came back with a can of soda. Simone took it, sipped lightly, then looked around. This house is really big. It must be hard to clean. I kept my voice steady. I manage. She tilted her head, as if asking something obvious. You live alone in a house this big? Yes. That must be so lonely. The way she said it wasn't sympathetic. It sounded like pity, or worse, like she was testing how weak I was. Andre hurried to change the subject, as if afraid the air had just brushed against a nerve. Mom made stew, Simone. Best in the whole state. We moved into the dining room. I served the food. Andre ate heartily, as always, as if coming back to his mother's house allowed him to be himself again. Simone, on the other hand, just pushed the food around her plate with her fork. I asked as gently as I could, "You don't like it?" "It's a bit salty for me," she replied calmly. "My stomach is sensitive," I immediately said. "I can make something else for you." Simone shrugged. "No, don't worry, I'm on a diet anyway." Lunch dragged on like a test of endurance. Simone talked about her studies, her plans, her family, and then she mentioned her mother, as if referring to a standard the whole world should follow. My mom is an interior designer. She has very refined taste. She always tells me that a woman's home reflects who she is. As she spoke, her eyes swept over my dining room again, the curtains, the paintings. The way I set the table, as if all of it wasn't enough. And do you know what the scariest part was? Not the things Simone said, but the way I began to look at myself through her eyes. I started wondering, was I really outdated? Was I really old? Was this house just a museum of a woman living in the past? I hated that feeling, but I couldn't stop it. Because when someone walks into your home and doesn't have to break a single thing, yet still makes you feel smaller inside your own walls, that person is more dangerous than you think. And that was only the beginning. After lunch, there were a few minutes when it was just Andre and me, while Simone went to the bathroom. Andre looked at me, eyes eager like a child waiting for praise. "What do you think?" I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to say that the girl made me feel small in my own house, that she criticized my cooking before even tasting it, that her cold eyes didn't match her polite smile, but I didn't. I only said, "She's beautiful." Andre lit up. "Right? I love her so much, Mom." And that was enough to keep me silent about everything else, because a mother doesn't shatter her child's illusions. A mother blesses, smiles, steps back, even when every instinct inside her is screaming that something is wrong. Simone came back from the bathroom. "Mrs. Henderson, thank you for lunch." It was very traditional. That word traditional, the way Simone said it, was not a compliment. It sounded like the way someone sets down an antique, gently, but with no intention of keeping it. Before leaving, she hugged me, a mechanical hug, no warmth. Then she whispered in my ear, "Andre talks a lot about you, about how close you two are." She said it as if it were a problem, as if I were an obstacle. I watched them leave at the door. Andre kissed my cheek, as always. "I'll call you tomorrow, Mom. Thank you for having us." I closed the door, and I stood alone in the hallway, feeling as if I had just seen a strange wind leave my house, while knowing for certain it would return, bringing a storm. I went into the living room and took out the navy blue velvet box, opened it. Franklin's ring glinted in the late afternoon light. I whispered to it as if Franklin were still there. "I don't like her. I don't like her for our son." But the ring didn't answer. And I kept those doubts in the same place I kept the ring, in silence, in loneliness. In the fear of a mother, afraid of losing the love of her only son, Michael and Simone got engaged 6 months after that first lunch, right in my house. He called me, his voice unable to hide his excitement. "Mom, I proposed. She said yes. We're getting married." "Congratulations, sweetheart," I said. And I meant it. Despite my doubts, I still wanted my son to be happy. "When's the wedding?" "A year from now. Simone wants a big wedding. Big, elegant." "Of course. I'll help with whatever you need." "Thank you, Mom. I know you always support me." At the time, I didn't understand. That support in their mouths would come to mean far more than I ever imagined. A week later, Simone called me. It was the first time we spoke directly, without Andre between us. "Mrs. Henderson, I need your help." I kept my voice calm, the way a mother always does. "Go ahead, dear. How can I help?" "My mom and I are planning the wedding, but our budget isn't enough for everything we want. There's a botanical garden in Austin. It's beautiful, but just the venue alone costs $85,000. My breath caught. $85,000. That's a lot of money, Simone. "I know," she replied immediately, as if the answer had already been packaged. "But my mom says a wedding is the only chance a woman gets to feel like a princess." Andre agrees. "It's just that, Andre earns well, but not enough for this." There was a pause between us. I already knew what was coming. I could feel it in the air like the sky darkening before a storm. Then Simone spoke. "Could you help us, Mrs. Henderson? I know Franklin left assets. And this is for your son, so Andre can have the wedding he deserves." "Let me think about it," I replied. "Of course. But they're only holding the venue with a deposit. If we don't pay within 2 weeks, we'll lose it." We hung up. I sat in the living room, the phone still in my hand. $85,000, an enormous amount. But it was true. I could afford it. Franklin had left me comfort, and in the end, everything would go to Andre anyway. So what difference did it make if I gave it to him now or later? That evening, I took Franklin's ring out of the box, placed it in my palm, studied it under the light. "What would you do?" I asked the ring as if Franklin could hear me. "Would you give him the money?" But Franklin wasn't there to answer, and I had to decide on my own. The next day, I transferred $85,000 to Andre. Andre called back immediately. "Mom, you have no idea what this means to us." "You're the best. Simone is so happy. I'm so happy." I swallowed hard. "I'm happy when you're happy." "We're happy, Mom, because of you." I thought that would be enough. I thought I had just bought myself a place in my son's life, in his marriage, in his future. The wedding took place in June, exactly 1 year after the engagement. I have to admit, Simone looked truly beautiful. A white crystal-embellished gown, a veil 3 meters long, a hairstyle straight out of a magazine. The botanical garden overflowed with white and pink roses, golden ribbons glittering under the sun. I arrived early wearing an old navy blue dress I had worn to my cousin's wedding 2 years ago. I thought there was no need to buy a new one. But when Simone saw me, she frowned. "Mrs. Henderson, is that the dress you're going to wear?" "Yes. Why, is there a problem?" "It's just the mothers of the bride and groom usually wear something a little more special, more elegant." "This dress is elegant," I replied, trying to stay calm. Simone exhaled sharply and turned to look at her mother as if seeking an ally. "Oh, forget it. What can we do about it now?" Valerie Carter stood there like a statue. 52 years old, platinum hair, filled lips, a thin frame that looked sculpted by surgery. She extended her hand but didn't smile. "You must be Andre's mother, Gloria Henderson, right?" "Very nice to meet you, Valerie Carter." Valerie looked me up and down, measuring, not curious. Then she spoke in a tone as light as praise, but as cold as an official report. "Simone told me you helped with the wedding costs. How generous of you." The way she said it told me everything. In her eyes, it wasn't generosity. It was obligation. The ceremony was so beautiful it almost hurt. Andre cried when Simone walked down the aisle. I cried too, but I wasn't sure those were tears of happiness. I felt out of place, like I was standing in the wrong spot in my own son's story. At the reception, they seated me at the very back table, next to Simone's distant relatives. No one spoke a single word to me. The head table had only the bride and groom, Simone's parents, the bridesmaids and groomsmen. I heard someone ask, "What about the groom's mother?" Valerie answered immediately, loud enough for people to hear, "Oh, she's back there in navy blue. Poor thing. She came alone. She only recently lost her husband. Poor thing." As if I were a tragic sight to pity, not a mother. Between dances, Andre came over. "Are you okay, Mom? Are you enjoying the party?" I smiled, the smile of a woman who has learned to swallow pain. "It's wonderful, sweetheart. Everything is perfect." Andre kissed my forehead. "Because of you. None of this would have happened without you." Then he turned back to the dance floor, back to his new wife, back to his new life, where I was becoming smaller and smaller, more and more invisible. I left before they cut the cake. No one noticed. On the way home, I pulled into an empty parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark. For the first time since Franklin's funeral, I let loneliness flood me. I had spent $85,000 on this wedding. I had smiled through every remark and every judging glance, and I was still invisible. I opened my purse, took out the navy velvet box, lifted the lid. Franklin's ring shimmered under the streetlight. "Do you see it?" I whispered. "Do you see what's happening?" Franklin couldn't answer. I drove back to the big empty house where no one was waiting. A month later, Andre and Simone moved to Plano. "I found a better job here," Andre said. "And Simone wants to be close to her mother." "That's wonderful," I replied. "So we'll see each other more often." "Exactly. But Mom, we need to talk about something." I knew that rhythm already. "Go on, sweetheart." We found a place in Willow Bend, 3 bedrooms, a rooftop patio, a 2-car garage, perfect. "It's just the down payment, $120,000. There it was, the second request. "Andre, I just gave you $85,000 for the wedding. Mom, I know, and I'm so grateful. But this is an investment. This is our home, where we'll start a family, where your grandchildren will grow up." Grandchildren hit my heart like a direct blow. I still tried to hold the line. "You think you could save for the down payment?" "We could, but it would take 2 to 3 years, and the house will be sold before then. You have resources. Dad left everything so you could live comfortably." I asked softly but clearly, "Yes, but also for me, for my future too, right?" And yet, I still transferred $120,000. They bought the house in Willow Bend. I helped them move, carrying boxes, mopping floors, hanging curtains. Valerie was there too, giving orders as if it were her house. "Simone, sweetheart, that painting goes in the living room, not the dining room." "Andre, have you hired the landscaper I recommended?" I was stacking plates in the kitchen when I heard Valerie ask from the living room, "Will Mrs. Henderson be coming around here often?" Andre answered, a little hesitant, "She's my mom, I guess, sometimes." Valerie let out a soft laugh. "Son, be careful. Mothers-in-law can be complicated, intrusive. Your Simone needs space to build her home. You understand what I mean, right?" Andre didn't answer. In the kitchen, the porcelain plate trembled in my hands. Intrusive. That was the word Valerie used for me. I walked out as if I hadn't heard anything, still smiling, still helping. Then I left early. In the car, alone, I finally cried. The months that followed were like an exercise in disappearance. I tried to be the perfect mother-in-law, not intrusive, not disruptive, waiting to be invited instead of showing up. Once a month, Andre invited me to dinner, always with Simone, always with Valerie. I brought homemade dessert. Simone put it in the kitchen without tasting it. "I'm watching my weight, mother-in-law, but thank you." Valerie talked about her own success. "Last month I designed a place in Highland Park. They paid me $60,000 just for consulting." Sometimes Andre asked, "How are you, Mom?" I answered, "Fine, sweetheart." "Everything's fine." Small lies. so I wouldn't become a burden. Then Simone announced she was pregnant. Andre called, crying with happiness. "Mom, I'm going to be a dad. You're going to have a grandbaby." Hope filled me until Valerie made an immediate decision at Sunday dinner. "I'll be moving in for the first 3 months. A new mother needs her own mother." I offered quietly, "I can help too." Valerie smiled. The kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Oh, Gloria, of course. When we've arranged everything, we'll let you know." They never let me know. Matthew was born in March. Andre sent photos through WhatsApp. His name is Matthew. He weighs 3.4 kilograms. He's perfect. My throat tightened with joy. "My son. Can I come meet him?" "Of course, Mom, but wait a few days. Simone is tired. Valerie is helping. When things are better, I'll tell you." I waited a week. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. Finally, they allowed me to visit. Valerie opened the door. "Come in, but don't be loud. The baby just fell asleep." Matthew lay in his crib, tiny and perfect. I bent down to lightly touch his cheek. Valerie warned immediately, "Don't wake him. It took us hours to get him to sleep." I stood there, unable to hold him, unable to kiss him, unable to tell him how much I loved him. 20 minutes later, Valerie told me to leave. Simone needs to rest. I drove home with a lump in my throat. In the living room, I took Franklin's ring out again. This time, I didn't just cry. I spoke to him. "I'm disappearing, Franklin. I'm becoming invisible. And worst of all, I'm erasing myself out of fear, out of love, just so I won't lose our son." In the large, empty house, I understood something terrible. I had become the kind of mother-in-law who needed permission to love, a woman who apologized for existing, a woman who paid for every crumb of attention. But I stayed silent because I was afraid that if I spoke, I would lose my son. When Matthew was 6 months old, the money requests kept coming. Simone's car broke down. She needs a new car for Matthew's safety. $35,000. Kitchen remodel because Simone cooks for Matthew more now. $25,000. Baby furniture, a better crib, a safer stroller. $18,000. Each time I transferred the money. Each time I reminded myself, for my grandson, for the family, for my son. But late at night, staring at my bank account, one question grew larger. When is it enough? Then one afternoon, everything shifted. Simone called, strangely, because she had never called before. "Mother-in-law, I need a favor." "Go ahead, dear." "My mom has to go to Texas for an urgent project, and I have an OB appointment, and there's no one to watch Matthew. Can you help?" My heart raced. "Of course. What time?" "Can you come in an hour? The appointment is at 3. "I'll be there." I drove to Willow Bend with an excitement I had forgotten for a long time. Finally, I would be alone with my grandson. Simone opened the door wearing athletic clothes, hair in a ponytail, bare-faced. She looked younger and more vulnerable. "Matthew just ate. He'll nap in another hour. Diapers and wipes are in the room. Don't give him anything but water." "Don't worry, I've got this." "I'll be gone 2 hours, max." Simone grabbed her bag and left. I stayed in the house I had helped pay for, but always felt like a guest inside. Matthew lay in his bouncer, watching a spinning toy. When he saw me, he smiled. That smile reminded me of Andre as a baby. I lifted him against my chest, warm milk and baby powder. I sang the lullaby I had sung to Andre 35 years ago. "Sleep, my baby, sleep, my love of Grandma. Sleep, the peace of Grandma's heart." Matthew drifted off. I laid him in the crib, stood there for a long time, my grandson, Franklin's continuation in me. For the first time in years, I felt like my life had meaning again. I stepped out quietly into the kitchen, thinking I'd make tea or a sandwich for Simone when she returned, to show her I wasn't just the babysitter, that I could be part of the family too. The kitchen was spotless, the glass counter gleaming, and on the table was Simone's phone. She had forgotten to take it with her. I didn't touch it, but the screen lit up on its own. A message from Valerie. Did you talk to Andre about the trust fund yet? You need to push harder. If the old woman doesn't put the house in your husband's name, everything will get complicated. I froze. My hands shook. The screen lit again. Remember what we said. As long as everything is in her name, you have no control. You need Andre to be tougher. It buzzed again. And don't talk to me about Austin. First, secure the Willow Bend house. Austin? What was the Austin thing? I backed away from the phone like it was fire. I sat on the sofa trying to breathe. Trust fund. The house. The old woman. I was the old woman. The house was mine. The house Franklin and I had bought, where we raised Andre. They wanted me to put it in my son's name. For what? Matthew started crying. I picked him up, soothed him, but my mind spun. All that money. $85,000, $120,000, $18,000, $35,000. Was that filial devotion or strategy? The distance I'd been forced to keep, the polite insults, the walls being built, was that space or calculation? 2 hours later, Simone came home. Everything okay? I looked at her and forced myself to stay calm. Perfect. Matthew slept for almost an hour. Great. Thank you, mother-in-law. I left quickly. In the car, I opened my transfer history, $85,000 last June, $120,000 August, $18,000 October, $25,000 December kitchen remodel. $35,000 February, Simone's car, $283,000 in less than 2 years. I stared at that number like I'd been slapped. I went home, walked straight into my office, and pulled out every document. Franklin's will, the deed, the hardware store paperwork, the statements. Everything was still in my name, exactly the way Franklin wanted. Because he understood me, and he understood Andre, a good man, but easily influenced, someone who needed protection, even from himself. I pressed Franklin's ring against my chest. You knew, I said. That's why you did it. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed every conversation, every request. And everything snapped into a pattern I had refused to see. The next morning, I called Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, I need to see you urgently. What happened, Mrs. Henderson? I answered slowly, clearly, like someone waking up from a long delirium. Yes. I finally opened my eyes. The next morning, I sat in Mr. Harrison's office. It was the same mahogany desk, the same pale light slanting through the window frame, the same familiar smell of old paper and printer's ink, but I was different. The last time I came here, I was a woman who had just lost her husband, so shattered that all I could do was nod at every sentence in the will. This time, I came carrying something painfully clear. I had seen the truth. Mr. Harrison removed his glasses and looked me straight in the eye. Mrs. Henderson, you said this was urgent. Yes. I took out my phone, opened the screenshots I had captured from Simone's phone before I left Willow Bend, and handed them to him. My son's mother-in-law, and possibly my daughter-in-law as well, are planning to pressure me into transferring my assets into Andre's name. Mr. Harrison read every line, slowly, carefully. I watched his face drain of color. He's demanding that you sign over the house, he said, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Has your son brought this up to you? He looked up. Not directly, I answered, but I know he will. It's only a matter of time. Mr. Harrison folded his glasses, laced his fingers together, and his voice turned more serious. Mrs. Henderson, your husband was very clear in the will. Everything remained in your name while you're alive for a reason. I know, I said, and for the first time my voice went hoarse. But I need to know. Do I have any choices to protect myself? Not just from outside pressure, but also from my own weakness? Mr. Harrison opened a thick file and flipped through a few pages. Patterson wasn't just a smart businessman, he was also a far-sighted husband. He included certain protective provisions in the will that we never discussed, because he hoped you would never need them. I held my breath. What provisions? Mr. Harrison looked at me, then spoke each word as if placing something heavy on the desk. If you feel you are being pressured, manipulated, or threatened into transferring assets, you can activate a reinforced trust. Once activated, your entire estate will be locked inside a legal structure that even you will not be able to change. It will automatically transfer to Andre only after you pass away. My throat went dry. It can't be reversed? It can't be reversed, Mr. Harrison answered immediately. That's what Mr. Patterson wanted. He knew there could be pressure. And he wanted to give you a tool to protect yourself, even when you're soft-hearted. I sat still and let those words sink into me. Franklin had known. He had known that one day I might end up in this exact situation, caught between love for my son and the instinct to protect myself. I asked again, almost in a whisper, "Is there anything else?" Mr. Harrison nodded. Yes. When the trust is activated, an automatic audit will be triggered. An audit of how Andre has handled any money you've given him over the past 2 years. My heart slammed once. An audit? What does that mean? It means that if Andre used the money for purposes he claimed he would not, if he lied about how it was used, if there was any fraud at all, it will be uncovered. And if there is? I heard my own voice ask, turning cold. Mr. Harrison didn't sugarcoat it. Then it becomes a legal matter, not just between you and your son, but a real legal matter. I was silent for a long time. Franklin hadn't just left me an inheritance. He had left me a shield, and if necessary, a sword as well. Finally, I spoke. My voice was steadier than the feeling inside my chest. I want to activate it. I want to activate the reinforced trust. I want the audit. I want to know the truth. Mr. Harrison looked at me deeply. Are you sure? Once you do this, there's no way back. I nodded. I'm sure. Because for the first time in 3 years, I'm not choosing my son. I'm choosing what Franklin wanted to leave me. I'm choosing to protect the legacy we built. Mr. Harrison gave a small nod. I'll prepare the paperwork. You'll need to sign tomorrow. When I walked out of that office, the daylight was so bright I had to squint, and I smiled. Not the smile of revenge, but the smile of release. The smile of a woman who finally stopped betraying herself just because of love. 2 days after I signed the documents, I received a call from an unknown number, Mrs. Henderson? Yes. Who is speaking? My name is Veronica Simmons. I work with your son, Andre, at the logistics company. My heart jolted. Is something wrong with Andre? Is my son okay? No, I'm sorry to scare you. Andre is fine. It's just, I need to talk to you. It's important. Can we meet? About what? Veronica hesitated for a second. I'd rather say it in person. Tomorrow at 11 at Riverside Cafe in downtown Plano, across from the theater. Is that okay? There was something in her voice, urgency mixed with fear. Okay, I'll be there. That night, I didn't sleep. What did this woman want to tell me? Did it have something to do with Andre, his job, or something else? The next morning, I arrived at Riverside 15 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee I didn't taste. My hand trembled against the cup. At exactly 11, Veronica walked in. She was around 42 with short hair, wearing a gray business suit, her face severe. She sat across from me and didn't smile. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Henderson. I didn't waste time. What is happening? What does this have to do with my son? Veronica took out her phone, scrolled for a few seconds, then turned it toward me. A photo. Andre was sitting in a restaurant with a woman, not Simone. The woman was young, brown hair, a bright smile. Andre had his arm around her shoulders, and the way he looked at her was the kind of look I hadn't seen in Andre in a long time. I heard my own voice ask, so weak it almost wasn't a voice at all. Who is she? Her name is Keisha Morgan, Veronica said softly. She works at the Austin branch. Andre goes there twice a month, says it's for work. Austin. The same Austin Valerie had mentioned in the message. I swallowed hard. How long have they been together? Almost a year. Maybe more, Veronica replied. I know because my cousin works in the same building. She's seen them together many times. Lunch, leaving hotels. The coffee twisted in my stomach. Why are you telling me this? Veronica looked at me, and for the first time, something like compassion appeared in her eyes. Because I used to be a wife who was cheated on, too, and back then, someone told me. It hurt, but I was grateful to know. I think you should know what kind of person your son is becoming before you make any important decisions for him. Important decisions? Veronica hesitated, then continued, her voice lower. Andre talks a lot at the office. He says he's going to inherit a significant amount, that his mother is old and soon everything will be his, that he has big plans. Each word landed like a knife. My son, saying I was old. Veronica lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, I needed you to know. I thanked her. I don't even know how I stood up. I don't know how I made it back to my car. But when I closed the car door, alone, I finally allowed myself to feel it all. The betrayal. Not only betrayal of Simone, not only betrayal of Matthew, but betrayal of me. Betrayal of everything Franklin and I had taught Andre about family, honor, commitment. I drove aimlessly for almost an hour, then ended up at a park. The very park where we used to take Andre every Sunday. I sat down on a bench. I watched families pass by, parents pushing strollers, children chasing balls. And I thought, when did I lose my son? When did the boy I loved so much turn into this man? Someone I didn't recognize. I took out my phone and typed into Google, Keisha Morgan Logistics, Austin, Texas. And I found her. LinkedIn, Keisha Morgan, 29 years old, operations manager. Her profile photo was the same woman in the picture. I went to her Instagram, public. And there they were. Trip photos, restaurants, sunsets. In a few of them, Andre wasn't tagged, but I still recognized him. The shoulder behind her, his hand, the watch on his wrist. Small signs, meant for people who know how to look. The most recent photo was from 2 weeks ago, celebrating at a bar. Caption, celebrating a new beginning with someone special. 2 weeks ago, right when Andre stopped speaking to me because I wouldn't sign the paperwork. A new beginning. Was he planning to leave Simone? To start a new life with Keisha Morgan? And if he did, what would happen to Matthew? Do you know what the scariest thing about the truth is? Not that it arrives suddenly, but that when you look back, you realize it's been there for a long time. It was there in the calls, Mom, I need a little money. It was there in the way they talked about Matthew's future, like a hook to pull you along. It was there every time you were pushed to the back, and you told yourself, it's fine, don't make a big deal. But the moment you read a sentence like the old woman, there is no going back, because from that moment, you understand. This isn't a family accidentally hurting you. This is a strategy. And when a mother realizes she's being turned into a target, the only question left is, will she stay silent or will she strike? I went home with my mind spinning. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even know what to say. That information was so heavy I had to carry it alone. That night, I sat in the living room with Franklin's ring in my hand, and I did something I hadn't done since the day he died. I spoke to him in anger. Franklin, our son is cheating on his wife. He's using his child. He's lying, and he's pressuring me to take everything you and I built. For what? To fund his new life? To impress his mistress? To buy his freedom? Hot tears ran down my cheeks. What am I supposed to do? Do I tell Simone? Do I confront him? Do I stay silent? And then, As if Franklin answered from somewhere far away, I remembered something he once said. When Andre was 15, he lied about his grades. Franklin found out and punished him. Andre cried, apologized, promised he would change. That night, lying in bed, I had said, "Maybe you're too hard on him." Franklin answered, "Gloria, love without consequences isn't love. It's complicity. If we let him lie now, what will he lie about later?" A parent's job isn't to make their child happy. It's to make them a good person. To make him a good person. Did we succeed, or had I, obsessed with being the perfect mother, forgiving everything, giving everything, raised a man who believed he could take without paying a price? 2 days later, Simone called me. She was crying. "Mother-in-law, I need to talk to you." "What happened, Simone? Can I meet you? I don't want to talk on the phone." We met at a cafe near her house. When Simone arrived, her eyes were swollen, her makeup smeared, her hands shaking. She sat down, and before she could say anything, she broke down crying. "Andre is cheating on me." There it was. The truth I already knew, but for her, it had just exploded. I asked, my voice slow, "How did you find out?" "I checked his phone. I know it was wrong, but something told me something wasn't right," Simone sobbed. "I found messages. Photos, hotel bookings in Austin, love messages, with someone named Keisha." She cried harder, like her chest was about to crack open. And worse than that, I found another conversation with my mom. My mom and Andre have been planning for months. Planning how to get you to sign over the house. My mom taught him what to say, how to pressure you. They used me. They used Matthew. It was all a strategy. Simone pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots. A message from Valerie to Andre. "You have to be tougher with your mother. Tell her it's for Matthew's future. If she doesn't sign now, it'll be harder later. Take advantage of how vulnerable she is." And Andre's reply, "I know, Valerie, but she's very stubborn. I'll bring her the papers already signed. All that's missing is her signature. Once we have the house, I can use it as collateral for the business I want to start with Keisha in Austin." In that moment, every piece clicked into place. The house wasn't for Matthew. It was capital to fund his new life with Keisha Morgan. Simone choked on her words. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know my mom was doing that." Did I believe her? I wasn't sure. But in that moment, it wasn't the most important thing anymore. I asked, "What are you going to do?" Simone wiped her tears, but they still kept falling. "I don't know. I have Matthew. I don't work. I depend on Andre completely. My mom tells me to forgive him, says all men fail, says what matters is keeping the family together. But mother-in-law, I can't. I can't live like that." I looked at Simone. The woman who once made me feel small, the woman who kept me away from Matthew, the woman who stood beside Valerie to manipulate everything. And now she sat here, shattered, betrayed by the very man I had raised. I could have taken revenge. I could have said, "Now you know how it feels," but I didn't, because my goal was never revenge. I placed my hand over hers, my voice turning firm. "Simone, you have to make a decision. What do you want for yourself and for Matthew?" She took a breath, like someone climbing out of the deepest water. "I want out. I want a divorce. I want to start over." "Then do it." Simone looked at me, desperate. "But I don't have money, not even to pay a lawyer." There was a silence. And then I said something I didn't even expect myself to say. "I'll help you." Simone froze and lifted her head. "What?" "I'll pay for a lawyer. A good one. Someone who can help you get fair child support for Matthew and help you leave that house with dignity." Simone shook her head, panicked. "Mother-in-law, I can't accept that." I looked her straight in the eye. "Yes, you can, because I'm not doing this for you, I'm doing it for Matthew." I spoke slowly, clearly. My grandson deserves a strong mother, a mother who doesn't stay in a dead marriage just because she's afraid. You can be that mother, but you need a push to begin. Simone burst into tears, this time not only pain, but relief. She nodded again and again, like someone who had just been pulled out of the dark. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And in that moment, I knew the truth was out. The decision had been made. But what came next would be the thing that finally made Andre understand that. The mother he thought was just an old woman who could be pressured had just relearned how to stand up straight. After Simone left, I sat in the car alone, feeling the weight of the decision I had just made. I was going to help my daughter-in-law divorce my son. I was going to pay for a lawyer to fight Andre. That wasn't revenge. That was justice. That was protecting Matthew from growing up in a house built on lies. I drove home. That day, I called the best family lawyer in Plano, Jacqueline Rivera, the one Mr. Harrison had recommended. I wired the retainer, $15,000. I arranged for Simone to meet her the following week. It was an investment in my grandson's future, in the possibility that one day, when Matthew grew up, he would have a mother who could look in the mirror without feeling ashamed. 3 days later, Andre called me. "Mom, we need to talk." "I know," I replied. "So do I." "Can you come for dinner tomorrow at 8? "Simone will cook. We need to settle this." Something in his voice told me this wasn't an invitation. This was a trap. "I'll be there," I said, because I knew the moment had come. The moment to confront, the moment to tell the truth, the moment to choose myself, even if that meant losing my son. Thursday came too fast. I woke up at 6 in the morning, even though I didn't need to be at Andre's house until 8 at night. The day stretched out in front of me like a desert I had to cross. I showered carefully. I chose my clothes with intention, the pearl gray dress Franklin had given me on our 30th wedding anniversary. Simple but elegant. I slid Franklin's ring onto the ring finger of my right hand. I held it up in the morning light. "You're coming with me," I told the ring. "Today, more than ever, you're coming with me." I spent the entire day organizing paperwork, putting documents away as if preparing for something final. Because I knew that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. At 7:30, I drove to Willow Bend. Traffic was heavy. The streets were lit up. The city moved through an ordinary Thursday night, unaware that for me this Thursday would change everything. I arrived exactly at 8. I rang the doorbell. Andre opened the door. Dark circles sat under his eyes. He wore a wrinkled white shirt. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't decode. "Come in, Mom." I stepped inside. The house smelled like reheated food and tension. And there, in the living room, sitting in the main armchair as if it belonged to her, was Valerie, dressed in white, hair perfectly styled. Red lipstick. She smiled at me, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows she has her prey cornered. "Gloria, good, you came." I didn't answer. I looked at Andre. What is she doing here? "Mom, Valerie is part of this family. She's Matthew's grandmother. She has the right to be part of this conversation." "What conversation?" "Sit down, please." I sat in the single chair, far from Valerie. Andre remained standing like a judge in a courtroom. Simone came out of the kitchen. She was holding Matthew in her arms. The baby was asleep. She looked at me, and her eyes were empty, as if something inside her had gone dark. "All right," Andre said, folding his arms. "Mom, we asked you here because we need to resolve this situation once and for all." "What situation?" Valerie leaned forward. "Gloria, let's be honest. You've been very selfish." I felt the air thicken. "Excuse me?" "You heard me, selfish. Your son is asking you for something completely reasonable, putting the house in his name. He's your only son, your only heir. Why are you clinging to it like that?" "Because it's my house." "It's an empty house where you live alone," Valerie continued. "Meanwhile, your son, your daughter-in-law, and your grandson are living in a house they can barely afford. Does that seem fair to you? They chose that house." I gave them $120,000 for the down payment. $120,000 that you'll never let them forget, Valerie spat, always reminding them you helped as if it were some favor instead of your duty. My duty? Of course. You're his mother. It's your responsibility to help your child. I looked at Andre. You're going to let her talk to your mother like that in your house? Andre lowered his eyes. Mom, Valerie has some reasonable points. Reasonable points. I stood up. I came here because you said we needed to talk, not to be insulted. You're not being insulted, Valerie cut in. You're being faced with the truth. And the truth is you're becoming a burden to your son. Those words hit me like a slap. A burden? Yes. Emotionally, financially, Andre has to worry about you, about your empty house, about your loneliness, when he should be focused on his own family. Valerie, enough, Simone said quietly. But Valerie didn't stop. What you need, Gloria, is to accept your stage of life. You're an older woman, a widow, alone. The healthiest thing is to sell that house, move into a smaller apartment, easier to manage, and give Andre what belongs to him. That way, he can have peace. And you can too. And who gave you the right to tell me how to live my life? Valerie smiled, that horrible smile. I don't have the right, but common sense does. And any rational person can see that you're being irrational. I turned to Andre. Do you think so too? That I'm irrational? That I'm a burden? Andre dragged a hand through his hair. Mom, Look, I just think it would be easier for everyone if you were more flexible. Flexible? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Flexible means giving up my legacy? Flexible means doing whatever you want no matter how I feel? It means thinking about your grandson's future, Valerie said. Don't use Matthew as a shield for your manipulation. Valerie stood up from the armchair. She stepped right in front of me, taller, younger, stronger. I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm the voice of reason in this dysfunctional family, because clearly you raised a son who's afraid to say no to his mother. Valerie, sit down, Simone ordered. But Valerie stayed standing, looking at me with contempt. Do you know what your problem is, Gloria? You never got over your husband's death. And you're clinging to material things because you have nothing else. No friends, no social life, no purpose, just that empty house and memories no one else wants. Enough. Simone's voice cut through the air like a knife. But the damage was done. Every word Valerie spoke was calculated to hurt, and it had worked. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I would not give her that pleasure. Andre, I said, turning to my son. Did you bring this woman here to humiliate me? Andre looked unsettled. Mom, I just wanted us to talk. Then we've talked, and I've heard everything you want to say. I slid Franklin's ring off my finger. I held it up so everyone could see it. This ring belonged to your father. A man who worked his whole life to build something, not just for him, not just for me, but for you too, Andre. But your father was wise enough to know that a legacy in the wrong hands becomes a curse, not a blessing. Mom, please! I pulled out my phone. I found the photos Veronica had sent me. I held them out to him. Andre went pale. Who is Keisha? Andre opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no excuse. Simone gasped. Valerie fell silent for the first time all night. The woman you've been seeing in Austin for almost a year, I continued. The woman you plan to start a business with by using my house as collateral. How do you know that? It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that now I know exactly what kind of man you are, and I know exactly what you want my house for. I looked at Valerie. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots of her messages to Andre that Simone had sent me. And I also know you and this woman have been planning for months how to manipulate me, how to pressure me, how to use Simone and Matthew as emotional tools until I surrender. Valerie lifted her chin. I'm only protecting my daughter and my grandson. A lie. You're protecting your investment, Because if Andre gets my inheritance, you benefit too. Or isn't it true you promised him that if he got the house, you'd help him with Keisha's business? Valerie didn't answer. She didn't deny it, because it was true. I turned to Simone. She was crying silently, holding Matthew in her arms. Simone, I'm sorry. I'm sorry my son did this to you. I'm sorry your mother used you, and I'm sorry this innocent child is trapped in the middle of all of it. Mother-in-law, she whispered, but I can't save you. That's not my battle. I looked at Andre again. I met with Mr. Harrison. I activated every protection measure in your father's will. The house, the hardware stores, the accounts. Everything is locked into irreversible trusts. I can't change it even if I wanted to. You will inherit only after I die. Not 1 day sooner. Not $1 sooner. Andre stepped toward me. Mom, you can't do this. I already did. That's revenge. That's justice. Or maybe it's simply what your father wanted from the beginning. You're punishing me for loving someone else. I'm protecting you from yourself, the way your father protected me. Valerie moved closer. Her face was flushed with rage. You're a bitter, selfish, cruel old woman. Maybe, I replied calmly, but I'm a bitter old woman with my house, with my legacy, with my dignity intact. Andre, you're not going to let her talk to me like that, Valerie hissed. And then it happened. Andre looked at me. He looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in his eyes. Mom, he said, his voice hard, you need to apologize to Valerie. Time stopped. What? You disrespected her. You humiliated her. She's the grandmother of my son. Apologize to her, right now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Andre, she humiliated me first. She called me selfish, a burden, a bitter old woman. And maybe she's right. Look at what you're doing, destroying your family over money. It's not about money. Apologize to my mother-in-law, Andre shouted. His voice echoed through the house. Matthew woke up and started crying, or get out of my house. That was the line, the ultimatum, the boundary I never thought my own son would cross. I looked at Andre, the man who had once grown inside my body, the baby I had rocked in my arms, the child I had sacrificed my entire teaching career for, and suddenly, standing in front of me was a stranger. I saw a man demanding that his own mother lower herself in front of the woman who had plotted against me. A man placing his manipulative mother-in-law above his own mother. A man turning my presence in his life into a condition, as if a mother's love had to come with a price tag. Simone was crying. Matthew was crying in her arms. Andre stared at me, waiting, hoping I would give in, hoping I would kneel again. But this time, it was different. I stood up. I took my handbag. I walked straight toward Valerie. She looked at me with a victorious smile, her eyes bright as if saying, I won. You have to surrender. I stopped in front of her, and I said only 3 words. Keep him then. Valerie's smile froze. What? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I spoke each word clearly, like stamping a seal onto the truth. Keep my son, keep his lies, keep his betrayal, keep this mess you helped create. It's all yours now. Then I turned to Andre. Son, your father left you a clean name, an honest legacy, solid values, and a mother who loved you more than her own life. And you traded it all for this. I lifted my hand and gestured around the room, at the chaos, at Simone's tears, at Matthew's cries, at Valerie. You traded it for a woman who's manipulating you. You traded it for a mistress in Austin. You traded it for money you never even earned. I walked toward the door. I can't save you anymore, and I won't try to save you anymore. Mom! Andre shouted. But I didn't stop. I opened the door. Cold night air slapped my face. I walked down the steps. I moved toward my car like a woman dragging herself out of a room with no air left in it. And when I sat alone in the car, my son's house still glowing behind me, I let the tears fall. Not tears of regret. They were tears of mourning. Because that night, I didn't just lose my son. I lost the illusion of my son, the boy I had once believed would never hurt the woman who loved him most. And yet, at the same time, I took something back. I took my dignity back. I took back the respect of the woman in the mirror. And I took back my peace, knowing I had done the right thing, even if the right thing hurt down to the bone. 8 months passed, 8 months since the day Andre walked out of my house in pieces. The first months were complete silence. But Margaret, my friend from book club, said something I never forgot. Silence between a mother and her son isn't always abandonment. Sometimes it's respect for each person's process. I learned about Andre through Simone. He lost his job. He had to move into a small apartment. He paid child support on time. And for the first time, he learned how to be a father without a safety net. As for Simone, she bloomed after the storm. She got a job at a marketing company. She cut her hair. She smiled more. Smiles that were real now, no longer that cold, polite kind. And she brought Matthew to visit me regularly every 2 weeks. Every time Simone looked at me and said, her voice lowering, "Thank you. Thank you for teaching me that self-love isn't selfish. It's survival." And me? I stopped living in a posture of waiting for the phone to ring. I stopped measuring my worth by how much my son needed me. I went back to the hardware stores, and I was surprised to discover there was still a lively, sharp part of me, a good eye for business, a steadiness I had forgotten for too long because I was always busy being a mother. 3 weeks ago, I received a letter from Andre. "Mom, I still don't fully understand it. It still hurts. But for the first time in my life, I look in the mirror and see someone I don't like, and I understand. I made that person myself. Dad would be proud of you." I'm not yet, but maybe one day. Andre. I cried when I read that letter, not because I was waiting for forgiveness, but because, for the first time, I saw a small thread of hope in the son I had raised. Not perfect, not redeemed, but honest. This morning, I turned 63. Before my friends arrived, I took Franklin's ring out one last time. I laid it in my palm and looked at it like I was looking at a chapter of my life. "I completed your will," I said. "It wasn't easy, but I did it. I protected what we built. I protected myself, and I gave our son the only chance he has to become a real man." I went out into the garden, to the rose bushes Franklin had planted. I dug a small hole beside the most beautiful one. Then I placed the ring into the warm earth and buried it. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally understood I didn't have to carry it anymore. Franklin wasn't inside a ring. Franklin was in the stores we built, in the house we chose, in the son we raised, in the hard decisions I had been brave enough to make. He was in me, and he would always be there. "Rest now, my love," I whispered. "Your work is finished. If my story touched you, I want you to know you're not alone." So many women have had to choose between being loved or being respected. Between pleasing others or protecting themselves, it's the hardest decision in the world. And on the other side of that decision, there is peace. It may not be the happy ending you once imagined. There may be loss, there may be grief, but there will be dignity. And dignity, at the end of the day, is the one thing no one can take from you. Unless you hand it over yourself. I'm not handing it over anymore. And I hope you won't either. If you want to hear more real stories like this, stories of betrayal, boundaries, and how a woman saves herself, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. One small click from you gives me the motivation to keep telling these stories. And who knows, maybe the next one will come at exactly the moment you need it. This afternoon, my friends came over. Margaret brought cake. Diane brought flowers. Linda brought wine. We sat in the garden, laughing, telling stories, celebrating, not what we had lost, but what we had found again, ourselves. As the sun set, I looked up at the rose bush where Franklin's ring now rested. A new rose had just bloomed, deep red, perfect. And I smiled, because I understood now, love doesn't die when we let go. It transforms, it takes root, it becomes the foundation we build a new life on. Franklin loved me enough to protect me, and I love myself enough to accept that protection. At last. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, share it with someone you love. Sometimes a story like this can change an entire day. May God bless you, and until next time, Gloria.